Hey, what's up, everybody? Jack here with DevSlopes.com. Welcome back from the South, and today we're going to get started on our journey into JavaScript basics. And to kick things off, I can't think of a better subject than variables. So, without spending a lot of time talking about them, let's go ahead and pull up a code editor. I'm going to throw out a little theory, and then we'll write some code and kind of show you what it's all about. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder on my desktop. And I'm just going to call it basics. And I'm going to put all of our code for this section in that folder. And let me go ahead and pull a add-on window up here. Now then, I'm also going to pull a terminal window up. And I'm going to try to do this. We'll see how it works out here. And we're going to change directory into our folder. There we go. Now then, this one is going to be called variables. So we'll just do that. And then in Atom here, we will add a project folder. And we will add that basics folder. All right. So there's our variables JavaScript file open. And I've got a few things pasted over here. I'm going to copy and paste in. So what is a variable? Well, if you come from another language, you probably already know. But if you don't, if you're brand new to programming, variables are like boxes or containers for storing data. They're named containers, and you can use the name to retrieve the value later. So, some of the rules for variables in JavaScript. Let's go ahead and bring this in here. Variables in JavaScript begin with the keyword var. Now, in es6, there's the new keywords let or const, and we'll cover those here in just a minute. But anyway, you start off with the keyword var, followed by the variable name, and then the assignment operator, which is an equal sign. And finally, you put the value in. So JavaScript is a dynamically typed language. And what that means is that the type of the variable is inferred from the value assigned to it. So if you assign a string to a variable, JavaScript just automatically knows that, hey, this is a string. So variables in JavaScript cannot be reserved words, reserved JavaScript keywords. And here's a link right here to this w3schools.com /js/js_reserve.asp. W3 Schools is a good resource to use. They've got a lot of information on there for JavaScript developers, but they've got a whole list of the reserved words that variable names cannot be. Variable names must also start with a letter, a $sign, or an underscore. They cannot begin with a number. It doesn't matter if it's capital or lowercase. There are some best practices regarding that, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. So, some examples. All right, this line of code right here. var one variable equals one variable. So anything enclosed in quotation marks is a string, which they can be single quotes or double quotes. It doesn't matter. You've got your choice. As far as quotes go, it's best to choose a style and stick with it. But anything enclosed inside of quotes is considered a string in JavaScript. So if we save this file right here, and that's one thing you've always got to be sure and save it before you try to run it. But if we save this file right here, and then we try to run it, you'll see here we get an unexpected number. So this is telling us right here, it's showing us exactly where the error is at, that this variable name starts with a number, and that's illegal. So there's one error. All right, so we've also said that it can't begin with a reserved word. So here we've got the variable as a reserved word, and that won't work either. So if we save this again and run it again, we get an error right here, unexpected token var. That's because var is a keyword and cannot be used as a variable. So let's go ahead and comment that back out. Okay, so preferred style is camel case, and that makes variables easier to read. And what camel case is you want to be descriptive with your variable names. So you want something like first name instead of just like X, because that way when you come back and you read it later, you'll know what you were referring to when you wrote it. At camel case, like this variable right here, if you'll notice, we've just got all lowercase letters. That is harder to read than if we did var first name equals Jack. And it probably doesn't make that big of a difference here, but just say you did something like grades to be counted in school. I don't even know what that means, but this is just an example. So you see there, I've got it all lowercase. It's not very easy to read that because, it's all lowercase. But if we did something like grades to be counted in school, you see that makes a lot more sense. It's so much easier to read. There's a couple of other practices, styles that people may use. One is underscores. So you could do okay, so you can see that's fairly easy to read as well. It's a little harder to type because you're always having to hit that underscore character. So in general, camel case is preferred, at least in my experience. Names should be descriptive. And chances are, if you're working with a team, you're probably going to have a style guide that's going to lay all this out. So just keep that in mind. And if you don't have a style guide to go by or anything, I highly recommend to do this camel case naming. So let's go ahead and move on here. So let's look at some examples here. And I'm going to scroll down, make a little bit of space. So an example of a string, we could say var full name equals Jack Davis. Okay, this is a string. Because it's wrapped in quotes. We could say items in cart. This is a number. Okay, we could say var is cart empty. And that is a Boolean value. And Booleans are either one of two things. They're either true or false. Now we've got two variables right here. And the ES5 way to concatenate things together, and when I say concatenate, that just means bring two variables, you combine them together. So in ES5, the way we would do that, and I'm going to type console.log here. And we're going to be using this a lot, so take note of this. Console.log is what lets us print this value out to the screen. So when we run node, anything we put with console log is going to get printed out to the console. So the way to do this in ES5 is we would say first name, and then a plus, and then a space with quotes around it, and then another plus, and then last name. All right, and if we save this, and over here we run it, you see we get the value Jack Davis printed out. So we combined, what we did here is we concatenated. We concatenated first name with a space and then last name. Now there's another way we could do it. We could say console.log first name comma, last name. Let's save it and then run it. And you see we get the same thing printed out. So there's two ways in the old ES5 style way to do this. Now for ES6, ES6 introduced something called template strings. And this is one of my favorite features by far in ES6. So we could say console.log, and then instead of quotes for a string, we use the backtick. And the backtick is located just above the tab key on your keyboard, or just to the left of the 1 on your keyboard. So I'm going to hit a backtick, and then I'm going to do a $sign and then curly braces, and I'm going to put my variable. And then I'm going to do a space, and I'm going to put a $sign and some more curly braces and put last name. And close that off with a semicolon. Now if I save that and run it, I got an error because this right here needs to be capitalized. So if I save that and run it, you see I get the same thing. Now you may be looking at this and thinking, well, that doesn't look any easier than these methods. Well, not necessarily. But if you do something like this, let's say, and it can get a lot more complicated. And I'm having some typo issues here. Let me save that and let's run it again. Okay. So you see here the IT director's name is Jack. Now, when you're substituting, when you're wanting to put your variables in, it can get pretty complicated if you're needing to put substitute variables in and put a lot of spaces and things like that. Template strings are really, really nice, and I will use them quite often through this course. Okay, so we can create a new variable. Let me go ahead and comment out all this right here. So we can skip down here. We can create a new variable by combining or concatenating two. So we could say var full name equals first name plus last name. And then we could log that out. Okay, so we've got, we commented all this out, but we left first name and last name uncommented. And that's because we need to use those here. So in this case, we're going to create a new variable called full name, and we're assigning it the value of the first name plus a space plus the last name. So then full value or full name should have this value inside it. So if we console log this, let me go ahead and save. And run it, you see we get Jack Davis. So now full name is equal to these two combined with a space in between. Now if we're going to do that with template strings, let me comment this out. We could do the same thing, except we could say backtick, $sign curly braces. Let me save that and go ahead and run it, and we get the same thing. So there's two different ways to do it. You can do these plus signs and put the spaces in there, or you can do the template strings, and I really like that method. That's one of the best things about ES6 that is available now. So let me go ahead and comment all this out, and we'll move on. All right, so let me copy a little comment here and paste it in. All right, so ES6 has added two more keywords for declaring variables. And I mentioned it up the top, and that's const and let. Let is very similar to var, with the exception that the variable cannot be redeclared after the declaration was initially made. Var is also scoped to the nearest function block, while let is scoped to the nearest enclosing block. A function could have an enclosing block inside of it, and if you declare a variable with let inside an enclosing block, the scope for that variable, in other words, it can't be seen outside of that block. With var, if it's declared anywhere in that function, even if it's inside an inner block, you still have access to that variable anywhere in that function. With let, you don't. And I think you'll kind of see what I'm talking about later on in the course. But basically, let, declared inside of an inner block, it could be a much smaller scope than a function block. Now, if you declare either one, let or var, outside of a function or a block, they're both global. So if you declare one, say at the top of your file or something, and it's not inside of a function or a block, it's available anywhere. In general, it's a good practice to use let instead of var, unless you need to use var for a specific reason. So let's go ahead and look at this. And you'll notice that in most of my code throughout the course, I use let instead of var in general. So we could say var dog's name is equal to Cody. Okay. Now with var, I can redeclare dog's name. So I could say dog's name again equals Harper. Now if I save this and run it, it's perfectly legal to do that. Okay, so with let's just look at let. So we'll say var cat's name and then we'll say let cat's name again. And if I save this and I run it, you see we get an error. And the error right here says identifier cat's name has already been declared. So what that's telling us is because we're using let here, we can't redeclare that variable name. Now we can reuse that name. So we could say right here, we could say console.log cat's name. And then, instead of using let to redeclare that variable, if we take let off, we can just say cat's name is equal to wuss. Now this should be perfectly legal. So if I save that and run it, you see here we get pickles and then wuss. So, perfectly legit to reassign or assign a new value to a variable that's been declared with let. But you can't redeclare it. And if you think about it, most of the time if you declare a variable and later on in the program you declare another variable and you give it the same name, that's probably not going to be on purpose. So that, to me, that's a big plus. You don't want to forget that you declared dog's name in a different spot in the program and then try to redeclare it with some other value that means something totally different. Now the other thing that we need to talk about is const. Now const is short for constant, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Once you declare a variable as constant, you cannot change the value and you cannot redeclare it. So in general, like I said, you want to use let for your variables. If you've got something that you need to assign that's not going to change, like say a name, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and use const. So just for some examples, say we're talking about an employee. So we could say const name is equal to Rick Smith. And we're going to use constant here because that's not going to change. That employee's name is not going to change. Now we'll use let for position. And we can use let for salary. We'll just say 60,000. We'll use let for his phone extension. Now we might want to use const for his birth date. So with this employee here, his name is never going to change, so we declared it with a constant. His birth date will never change, so we declared it with a constant. But he could get a promotion or a demotion from this position he's in, or just make a change. His salary, he could get a raise or a pay cut. And his extension, he could move offices and have a different extension. So that's the whole thing between the new ES6, let, and const. In general, if you need the value to be able to change, you'll want to use let. If it's a constant that's never going to change, then use const. And I highly recommend using let instead of var, wherever possible. Unless there's just some specific case that you have to use var. So far, with what I've been doing, it hasn't been an issue. Let is wonderful. So anyway, that pretty much wraps it up for variables. Let's go ahead and jump over the next lesson and take a look at something else.